Hey everybody, it's Charles, and today we're going to be working on a workshop for understanding and using patterns in art. And today we're going to talk about a specific kind of a pattern called a tessellation. Tessellations are basically tiles that fit together perfectly without any overlap or without any space in between. So they should align perfectly, just like floor tiles or wall tiles or ceiling tiles. There's no gaps in between. They fit together the way they're designed to fit together. Now there are certain geometric shapes that fit together. By geometric I mean that they're regular, even shapes. Things like equilateral triangles fit together perfectly and can make a tessellation. Squares, rectangles, and hexagons all fit together perfectly to make a tessellation. So today what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use a program called GIMP to make a digital tessellation based upon the properties of an equilateral triangle. An equilateral triangle, if you don't know, is one that has three equal sides and three equal angles. The property that's most important for the equilateral triangle that's going to make it work is the 60-degree angle. There are three 60-degree angles, and maintaining and keeping that 60-degree angle between the sides of the shape that we're going to make, which is not going to be a geometric shape, it's going to be something irregular that's a little bit more decorative. So we're going to maintain that 60-degree angle, and that's what's going to make it tessellate and work perfect. This is what the GIMP interface looks like. We have the main area here that we work in. Here's our tools. Once we're clicked on a tool, right now we're on the Move tool, it gives us all the different tool options that go with that tool. So if I change to, let's say, the paintbrush tool, you'll see that the tool options change along with it. Over here is a brush panel that tells us what brushes we can use. And there are brushes that are everything from solid brushes to fuzzy brushes to shapes to even there's one that looks like a bell pepper or one that looks like the GIMP logo. You can actually draw with those. So we can use those brushes. Below the brush panel is the tools that go with the brushes that tell about the spacing and things like that. And right below that is called the layers panel. Actually there are three panels built in there: layers, channels, and paths. We're going to work with layers mostly. And here's where we're going to use the tools that are related to layers. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so the way we start is we're going to, instead of opening a picture like you normally would do in a photo editing program, we are just going to be opening a blank page to work on. So the way we start out is we go File, New, or we can go Command N on a Mac or Control N on a PC. Once we have File, New, we get this little new dialog box. This is the size of the page. That's a little large for what we want to do. That would take a lot to fill that up. So I'm going to change mine to 800 by 600. You can choose to work bigger or smaller. If you work too large though, you're going to run out of working memory. It'll just make your file so enormous that you won't be able to keep working, and it's going to end up crashing, is my experience with GIMP. So I want to keep it kind of small. I'm going to keep it to 800 by 600, and then I'm going to go to the advanced options. And you see my resolution is print resolution. If I want to print this out, that would be the ultimate best. You could get away with 200 by 200 if you want to print it out. But what I suggest while you're practicing and learning is to keep it to what we call web resolution, which is 72 pixels per inch. So I'm going to change that to 72, and you can see here, because this is locks the two values together, it also changed my Y resolution to 72 as well. Alright, so normally and typically I would not give a tessellation a background color, but I want to put a background color on this particular project because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. It's hard to see what you're doing when you don't have a white background or a colored background to work on. So I'm going to give it that white background from the background color here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by creating the transparent layer that we need. So we have a box here down at the bottom. You can see where my mouse is going, the arrow. It says create a new layer and add it to the image. I'm going to call this my base layer. So I'm going to name it base. You can name it whatever you want that works for you. And instead of foreground color or background color or white, I'm just going to choose transparency here because I really need a transparent layer, and you'll see why in a couple minutes why I absolutely need that. So now my page is set up and I'm ready to get started. my resolution's low enough and image size is low enough that I should be able to do a nice tessellation without too much problem. All right, so the very first tool that I need to use is called my Paths tool. It says Create and Edit Paths, and you can access that in your tool panel. And if you have trouble finding it, if you just hit the letter B, it should bring you right to that tool. The way I'm going to use this is I'm just going to click and leave kind of a dot there. I'm going to move to a second spot, and this time when I click, I'm going to hold it and drag. So watch, I'm going to click, hold, and drag to make it curve. And depending upon which way I dragged, I can make it curve in different ways. Then I'm going to go to a third spot, and I'm going to click again and drag a little bit. So there's a crooked line, obviously not part of an equilateral triangle, but you can see I have a path drawn that's a crooked line. And in order to turn that into a drawing, into a line, I'm going to go to Stroke Path. I'm going to set my line width to, let's make it 3, and I'm going to hit Stroke. So now when I switch to another tool, you'll see I have a black line drawn that traces that path. And that's a nice, interesting path to work with. So that one's going to work nicely. All right, the very next thing I have to do now is I have to duplicate that layer. If I go down to this bar down here, and I click one that looks like 2 overlapping triangles, it says create a duplicate of the layer and add it to the image. I can just click that and it makes another copy of that layer. Now you can't see that because it is on top of the other layer, so I'm just going to move it off just so that you can see. You see I have an exact copy on a second layer. And I'm going to go Control Z to put it back exactly where it was. So working on that top layer, and the way I know I'm working on that layer specifically is it's a darker shade of gray than the bottom 2 layers. If I were working on the base, that would be the darker of the 3 layers. But right now, I want to be working on the top layer. All right, and I'm going to choose my Rotate tool. Rotate tool's in the tool panel. If you hit Shift and R, it will bring you right there. Or you can just click on it from the tool panel. And you're going to click on your page, and a couple of things pop up. You get this Rotate panel up here that tells you how you want to rotate it, and you get this cursor. This is going to say where are we going to rotate around. If I rotate it around that, and I rotate it 60 degrees, I'm going to have my objects up here someplace. So instead of doing that, I'm going to drag that over right to the tip. I don't have to really move it much. I can move it very minimally and have it in the right spot. And to tell that I'm on the right spot, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to use this little up arrow tool to scroll around to get to the end to make sure that I'm really on that tip of the end. I'm over a little bit, so I want to move it so that it's kind of centered and right on that tip. The more accurately I get this, the easier it will be to make this work. All right, so you see it's right now centered on that tip. I'll zoom in even a little more, and you'll be able to see that it's right on the tip of that line. Notice that the line is starting to pixelate a little bit. GIMP is a bitmap program, although it does have some vector tools. It's a bitmap program. So when you zoom in too much with low resolution, you start to get it to pixelate like that. All right, so I'm going to zoom back out. And by the way, zooming in and out, there are a couple of ways to do it. You can go to View and Zoom, and then choose your zoom level, or you can just simply zoom in or out. You can also hit Command if on a Mac or Control on a PC, and scroll the wheel of your mouse if you have a mouse with a wheel, and that'll bring it in or out. Zoom in, zoom out. And then the third way is there's a little tool on the tool panel called the Zoom tool. You can hit the letter Z to use the Zoom tool, and then you can just trace on where you want to zoom in or out to. And that one comes with, if you're clicked on that, it comes with a zoom in or a zoom out. All right, so I'm at a good spot right now. I have that where I want it, and remember I said a specific angle that was important for equilateral triangles. That's what I want to rotate this by. I want to rotate it by 60 degrees. So I'm going to type in 60 under angle up here, and then I'm going to click rotate. And you see that it is almost perfectly lined up with the first line. I'm going to take my move tool. I can hit the letter M. I'm going to zoom in and look at the tips. And I can use the arrow keys to go up and down. That looks pretty decent. So we got the tips really on top of each other. Now I've got two sides of my shape that I'm going to work with. Before we go on to the third side, I want to merge those two layers. So there are a couple of ways to do that. The easiest way is to shut off the background layer. I've had this problem a couple of times now. Working with that third layer, for some reason, when I go to merge, it disappears. So what I've found as a solution for that is to duplicate that layer. So now I have two copies of that layer, and merge those two layers together. So I'm merging those together, and then you'll see that that doesn't disappear when I go to merge. So I'm going to turn that off, the background, so that I can't merge that one accidentally. And I'm going to go Command M to merge the two layers that are visible. And now when I put that layer back on, I have that basic shape there of the first two sides of our shape that's altered from an equilateral triangle. And we're going to work from there to build the third side, and then that will be our shape that we're going to illustrate and tessellate and make it work. All right, so let's get started with side 3. To make the third side, I need to add another new layer that has to have transparency, and this one's still called base. I'm going to call this one side 3A, and I'm going to click OK. It's got transparency, which is what I need. This one is the base, which now has the first two sides on it, right? So when we had a side 2 up there, we could have renamed that. It said base copy. We could have renamed that to side 2 if we wanted to. All right, so side 3A and base are our two main layers, and then there's the white background that's just helping us see those. All right, so on side 3A, now I have to do a little bit of math. What I have to do in terms of geometry, because this is really a geometry thing, is I need to find out where those endpoints are on the graph that we've kind of created here with the rulers on the sides. And then we have to find the midpoint between the two, and that will help us make that third line. If we absolutely wanted to, we could just draw a straight line from this tip to this tip, and that would be an interesting shape, but not as interesting a shape as I would like to make for the project. So if you're having trouble with the third line, you could just connect this line to this line, and that would certainly work to tessellate. All right? So I don't want you to panic too much, but if you want to do it a little more complex like I'm doing, watch the instructions here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to go to each point. So if we look at this point here, which is the bottommost point of the first side, we can go to the ruler on the left side, click on it and drag while you're holding your button down. And if we drag right to the end there, that is the x-coordinate of our graph. And we can do the same thing from the top ruler, click, hold, and drag, and get this down to where that ends. And now that will be our y-coordinate. So let's write those numbers down so that we can remember what they are. So what I see at the top is I have 100 and 125, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spaces between 100 and 125. So 25 divided by 10, so each line is 2.5. So we've got 100 and a little less than 105. So I'm going to say 104 for my x on the first point, 104 for my x, and my y for that point. And again, I have the same scale, so it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This one's almost right on 7. So 2.5 times 7. 7 times 2 is 14, and 3.5 is 17.5. So I'm going to say we are at 375, 385, 388. All right. So it's 387.5, 388, somewhere near that. All right, now let's scroll up to look at that other point. And we're going to do the same thing with the rulers. I'm going to drag this over for my x-coordinate. I'm going to drag this one down for my y-coordinate. So my x-coordinate here is 125, 4, 5. There are 6 lines times 2.5. That's 12, and 3 is 15. So 125 and 15 is 140 for my x-coordinate. And my y-coordinate here is got 1, 2, 3, 4, a little less than 5 lines times 2.5. 5 times 2 is 10. 5 times a half is 2.5. So I'm going to say that's about 12. So 125 and 12 is, you know what, that's a little less than 12. Let's make it 11. 125 and 11 is 135, 136. Okay, so now what we do, now that we have our two coordinates, which are 104, 388 and 140, 136, is we're going to average the x-coordinates, bring a line out that way, and then we'll average the y-coordinates, and where those 2 points meet, that'll be our center point. So our two x-coordinates are 104 and 140. So if we add those together, 104 plus 140, we get 244. And if we divide that by 2, our result is 122. So our x-coordinate, our center x-coordinate is 122, which is just about this line here, just a nudge past it. So I'm going to grab from the left ruler and drag. So this is 125, 2.5 less would be 122.5. So just a little bit nudge past there, as close as I can to it without touching it. All right, and now to figure out the y-coordinate. And notice that if this doesn't look like it's in half, dividing these two lines, then you probably calculated incorrectly, so you probably want to go back and check your calculation. Our two y-coordinates are 388 and 136, and if we average those, that's 14, that's 12, and that's 3, 4, 5, 24 divided by 2, which gives me 2. You can use a calculator, by the way, on this. I'm doing it on paper because it's just right in front of me. 262. So our y-coordinate for our center point is going to be 262. So let's bring it down. We've got 200. This is 225, 250. The fourth one is about 260, and just a nudge beyond that would be about 262. So I'm going to zoom back out so we can see if that looks like half, and it does. I think we did a pretty good job finding our center point. That's the hardest part of this whole project, is getting that center point. And again, if you don't feel comfortable or good about it, please feel free to just do a straight line there. But I want you to at least give it a try. It's always good to learn something new. So now what I'm going to do is, on this third layer that's transparent, right now there's nothing on there, I'm going to draw a line from here to the center point, or I could draw it from here to the center point. Either way. And the way I do that is I go back to my Bezier tool. So I'm going to hit B to go to Bezier tool, which is our paths tool, and find exactly the end of that line, and it should be where our two guides meet. I'm going to click there. I'm going to click on that center point that we just created, and I'm going to drag a curve shape. All right, and then I'm going to go to stroke the path. I'm going to stroke it. And now I have half of my third side, and I need to get to the fourth side. So what I'm going to do that, and we should check the corners to make sure it's perfectly aligned and everything else. But what I want to do to get to the third side is I need to duplicate that layer. So I'm going to duplicate it. So now it says layer 3A copy. If I want to, I could change it to side 3B because of this other half of that side. So I've got side 3A and side 3B. And one is sitting right on top of the other, so I want to rotate it. So go back to the Shift-R rotate tool, click on here, and you want to drag this right onto our center point there. And now the only difference between this and all the other times we rotate things is we're not using 60 degrees. We're using 60 times 3, which is 180, to flip this around a full 180 degrees. So there are two ways to do that. I can click in here and type 180, or I could just pull this all the way to the side, which is 180 degrees. And if I calculate it correctly, and I place this perfectly, they should line up exactly. I see I have a little bit missing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my move tool, and I'm going to click right on that line. If you click on the white or anything below it, it won't work. I want to clear my guides so that I can see what I'm doing better. If you go to Image, Guides, Remove All Guides, now I can see what I'm doing a little better. And my guess is we were off a slight little bit because it doesn't look like this is big enough to get to that end there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it here and just put in a little line to connect those two. And that should hopefully work. All right, so the way I can do that is I'm going to go back to my Bezier tool. I'm going to click here, and I'm going to click here, right on the two tips, and I'm just going to stroke that little bit of path. And hopefully that little bump won't prevent us from making things fit. Hopefully. We'll see how it works out. So now I want to merge my 3 layers together. Merge down a third time to merge it to the base. And now I have a shape that will hopefully tessellate. All right, so what I want to do is I want to look at this shape, and I want to see, you ever look at the clouds and say, gee, that kind of looks like an elephant, or it looks like a horse or something. And it's just based on the shape of the cloud, right? So you want to look at this, what you created, and you want to think in terms of what does that look like to me, and what would I like to illustrate here? So the way it's sitting, it's a little bit like a bird's head. Maybe this is the beak area over here. Maybe it's like almost like Woody Woodpecker or some kind of a bird. But if I want a better idea of what it might look like, I'm going to try rotating that around a little bit. And in order to rotate it and still be able to see it on the page, I can put that right in the center. And then as I rotate it, I'll just rotate around the center. So this way, maybe a ghost, or maybe a hood, a soldier, a knight. Maybe it's a suit of armor. I'm not sure what else that could be. If I'm going a little more, maybe this is a guy with a pointy head and a nice beard down here. You have to really try to use your imagination sometimes to get a good illustration. Okay, maybe that might be a saddle. I haven't done a saddle. Let's do a saddle. All right, so I'm going to click rotate, leave it there. And the next step in doing this is using the painting tools to decorate it. So one of the things that I like to do first is it helps me to not paint outside the lines, is if I fill it with a color, I could just make it black because it's ready to fill black. But since I'm working with a saddle, saddles are generally brown, so maybe I want to go to one of the browns. So if I come to here and I find a nice brown that I like, I can go OK. And using my paint bucket tool, which is Shift B, so just regular B is your pen tool, your paths tool, your Bezier tool. Shift B is the bucket tool, the paint bucket. You can fill that. But you see that there's a little white ring around there. So I would actually come in with my paintbrush and go paint that white ring so that it fills in properly. I'm not going to do that on camera to waste your time, so I'm just going to stop my film, and when that white is filled in and I feel comfortable with what I have, I'll turn back on and show you. Okay, I'm back. So you can see that's painted in now. There's no white lines around the edges. And the reason I want to have a nice completed full color all the way around, it's got a black outline, but it's still color, is this is on a transparent layer. So selecting it with a solid color is much easier if I can do that. I want to click on the layer that says base because this is all on the base right now, not the background. And if you scroll down, you will see something that says alpha to selection. I think it's a little bit off the screen. I'm going to try and see if I can do that another way. So if I go layer, and it's the layer that's chosen. So I can go use the layer menu here, go down to transparency, and go alpha to selection. I could also right click on here, go to layer, and transparency, and alpha to selection. So you can see that. So I'm going to choose alpha to selection from any of those 3 places. And you can see now it looks like a little dancing line around the edges. That means it's been selected. And while that's selected, I cannot paint outside the selection. So if I go to my paintbrush and load up my next color, let's say I want to use some lighter browns for the highlights. Let's go over to maybe over here to make a highlight brown color and click OK. When I try to paint over here, it will not paint. But if I paint inside here, a highlight, I can paint there without having to worry about going over the edge. And I'm going to paint sort of a highlight shape in here and just kind of fill that with that highlight. One of the things that I suggest is use your best drawing. You can do cartoony drawing, that's fine. But look for, if you're doing something like a saddle like I'm doing, we have an idea in our heads what a saddle looks like, but we may not be able to translate that so easily to everybody else. So look for a picture of a saddle that kind of fits the image you're drawing. I found this one, and you can see that it has a similar shape, a little different, but a similar shape to what I'm working with. So if I had this as my medium brown, this is highlight up here, it gets a little darker here, and then I got a bright highlight along the edge there. So in order to be able to understand what that saddle looks like, it helps if I could be looking at one. So I'm just going to move that off my screen a little bit. You'll be able to see it at the bottom, I think, and I will be working in here, so you'll be able to see the part I'm working on. So with that medium color, I probably should zoom in so I can see what I'm doing better. Pick that up, get that going out a little bit, and there are a lot of good drawing tools in here that I could use. So down the edges, I want this to be a pretty decent curve. It's going to be a little pixelated because we're working in a raster program, a bitmap program, which is okay. All right, so I got sorted the shape. Let's bring that down a little further this way, and then back up. I want to definitely get that three-dimensional look going. And again, that's kind of the way I draw. If you don't draw three-dimensional, that's fine. You can work however you work. So now I want to use a thinner brush. It's pretty thin now. It's down at 3. I'm going to bring it down to 1. I want to paint with the white. You know what? Let's bring it up to 2 for the edge, for that shiny highlight. And I want to choose a fuzzier brush so that it's brightest in the middle, but also it will give me that bright highlight down the middle, but kind of fuzz out the same way that it is on the picture. That's a little too strong for my taste, so I'm going to go Command Z. And what I want to do is I want to change the opacity. Opacity is the opposite of transparency. So by changing the opacity, I'm making it more transparent. If I paint in here now with the opacity lowered, it's going to look a little more like a natural highlight. Not loving that either. It's still too bright. But the lower I go, the more it's going to look like a highlight than a white line on there. All right. So that's going to give me the basic shape that I'm working with over there. I might even go even more transparent. I'm at 27% opacity. If I bring it down to even smaller and maybe increase the brush size and fuzziness even more, I can put a little bit of that sort of hazy, shiny part on the seat. Kind of give it that shine that's there already. If I go over it too much, I'm going to end up losing the transparency, getting more opaque. Another thing that I can do, another thing that I like to use sometimes is the smudge tool. I don't know if when you draw, you smudge with your finger or with a stump or something, but I find that sometimes that will help the look of a highlight by blending it in by smudging so that it's not too bright. And also blend in from below and bring the darker color up into it a little bit if it's too bright in a certain area. And what I'll get is a nice illustration here of the saddle. So I'm not going to make you watch the entire thing I'm doing, but if there's something important, I'll come back and show you. But for now, the point that I'm making here is that you want to do your illustration in such a way that it represents the shape that you've given yourself. So I'm going to finish this illustration and then I will come back and maybe show you a couple of different pointers about the drawing as I get to them, and we'll move on from there. All right? All right, so I spent a little time illustrating and you can see that I've gone a little bit with it. I would probably go some more. One of the things right here, it kind of blurred a little bit, so that may cause a little problem. Even though I had it selected, when I smudged in that area, it made a little bit of a blur, so I'm hoping that doesn't cause much of a problem. I don't want to delay finishing up for you, so let me zoom out and center all this, and we can continue. All right, so one of the things you could do is you could scale this bigger or smaller. It's a little large for where it is. where you won't see a complete tessellation. Things will start running off the page a little bigger. So I'm going to use the scale tool, which is this one, and it's Shift S if you don't see it right away. I'm going to click on there, and I just want to make sure that the aspect ratio is locked. That means that when I scale one side, the other side will also scale. So right now, the layer that's on is pretty big. I want to scale it down so that I'll have plenty of room to tessellate. So that's probably pretty good. I'm going to click Scale, and then I'm going to click my Move tool, or I could hit M, and then I'm going to move it out here. So that's my saddle. Doesn't look a lot like a saddle right now, but it is what it is. And it's a nice illustration, though. I think I did a good job making an illustration. It kind of looks leathery, which was what I was going for. And, you know, maybe I could have picked a different thing, but that's kind of what I saw when I got it in that position. I hadn't done one before, so I wanted to try that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I find it works best if we go layer to image size. That'll get rid of those yellow lines where the layer was overextended outside the area. So now it crops it off right there. So now on that layer, what I need to do is I need to duplicate it. I can right click and click duplicate, or as we talked about before, I can hit down here where the two looks like rectangles overlap each other. But once I duplicate, this is where that 60 degrees is going to come in handy again. So I'm going to click on my rotate tool, or Shift R for rotate. I'm going to take my base layer, move it up here, and I'm going to reset the image size. So I'm going to go layer to image size to get rid of those yellow lines that pop up. Duplicate the layer. Now I want to go to the rotate tool, click on here, drag this right to the tip. And if I'm right on the tip, when I hit 60, it should rotate right into place. So I click rotate to keep that rotation, and I can double check it by using my move tool. I usually do. So I take it. I want to make sure that it's perfectly aligned in there. All right, and what I'm going to do each layer, I'm going to go duplicate that top layer again, then go back to the rotate tool, and I'm going to click on here, and again bring it right to this tip here. What I'm going to do is be making sort of a pinwheel of saddles. 60, and again it's pretty close to right on. I'm going to click rotate, and I'm going to make sure that it's right on. And again, once again, I'm going to hit duplicate. I'll do it down here this time, just so that you can see it could be done both ways. I'm going to go back to my rotate tool, move this to the tip again, and 60 degrees again, and hit rotate and rotate it. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I've gone full circle, so I got to do that twice more. Okay, 60 degrees. Rotate. I didn't move the center point this time, so I'm off a little bit. Again, you want to be as exact as possible so that you're not overlapping. One more time. So I'm going to duplicate the layer. I'm going to go back to my rotate tool, click on it, drag this right to that point there, and the closer I am to that point, the less I'll have to move it later. And 60 degrees, and rotate, and I need to move that one a little bit. So now when I move it in, it should line up exactly with no gaps and no spaces. My image is starting to get really huge and large. So what I can do now is I can merge it all together without the background. I'm going to turn off the background now. I'm going to hit Control M to merge all those layers together. Just make sure they're lined up before you do that. And now I can just duplicate and move it to fill my whole page. So I'm going to go duplicate the layer and use my move tool to move it into another position. Duplicate that layer again. It doesn't really matter which layer you duplicate. So long as you're doing duplicate and move, you should be able to move it into the right position. It's just hard to keep track if you're not consistent with which layer you're doing. So I always try to do the top layer. So duplicate layer, drag it. There's a little space here. I got to remember to come back and get that one. Duplicate the layer again and drag it. And again, once this is completely filled and I've gotten all those spots, I can make my image size a little smaller. I'm going to duplicate the layer again so I can make the image size a little smaller by merging everything down. And duplicate again. You see I'm getting close to a completed picture here. Duplicate layer, drag it in here. And then I'm going to duplicate one last time to come back and get that piece that's missing. So I'm going to duplicate it. Even though I don't need much of it, I do need to drag something over into there. So I have to have a duplicated layer to be able to fill that properly. And you can see I've got a full page now. If I turn this back on, I can see if there are any gaps. I didn't see a big difference, a little bit of a difference. There's a little bit of a gap over here, for example. So I can use my move tool to fill that gap by moving that. If there's a gap in the middle of something, it's a little harder to fix. But you want to try and get rid of the gaps as much as possible, or it's not a true tessellation. Alright, I think I pretty much have it correct now. So now that I have it correct, I can merge. I'm going to go Command M and merge all my layers down together, and that's going to make the size of my file smaller. And you can see I have a nice pattern that's really interesting. Whether or not it reads or looks like a saddle is debatable, but it is an interesting pattern. And the goal was to make patterns in art with an illustration of some sort. All right, so if you have any questions or you have a difficulty completing this workshop, please let me know, and I will be happy to work with you to help you complete it. All right, have a great day, everybody, and I'm looking forward to the next workshop.